Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as...
We had to run through the airport in Chicago and barely make our flight. And we're in the jet bridge with all these other people. And a gate agent confronts me and tells me I can't bring a dog on board, that I'm trying to sneak a dog on board. And I have to say once again, my daughter has Tourette Syndrome.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey everybody, it's Ben. Thanks for the positive response to episode 1. I actually slipped up last week and said season 1, episode 4 at the end. This is the 4th season 4 of Tourette's podcast, our 2nd episode at this point. Season 4, episode 2, and episode 1 got some great feedback. Thanks so much. And of course, thank you to the Tourette Association of America for being our primary sponsor, Tourette.org, for all kinds of helpful resources and answers to frequently asked questions and so on. It's a great information source no matter where you are in the world. Tons of easily absorbed info for anybody who'd like to study Tourette or do a research project on it for school or just have a better grasp on what TS is versus the less interesting, limited pop culture impression. Again, Tourette.org. This podcast, of course, means to serve that purpose too, be a resource, be a true source of perspective for what Tourette Syndrome is. Each week, I, somebody with Tourette Syndrome, talk to somebody else out there in the world who also has TS, and we just collide all kinds of personal experiences, both hilarious and harrowing. Because when a big factor of your life is totally involuntary, like the daily series of disorder caliber tics that I live with and the people on this show live with, then it's a pretty alright thing to talk openly about it for the benefit of other people living in isolation under similar circumstances. And I think because of that, everyone here, whether you have TS or not, can find something to relate to. Often a small quirk you thought nobody else had, you'll be listening and you'll hear a perfect stranger talk about it, the exact same weird little quirk that you thought you were the only person on the planet to have. And just as often, something big that might change how you see your place in the world. Thanks for listening to Tourette's podcast, and I know you're going to dig today's episode because we've got 2 different angles this week, from a 14-year-old girl who has TS and from her mother. So of course, this gets into the intersection of Tourette Syndrome and school, social life, balancing all the things of growing with something as complicated as TS, or as complicated as it can be. And we talk a little bit about Cbit, or Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics, an increasingly popular method of managing and reducing tics or their severity by way of certain mental exercises and giving your tics some neutralizing competition, so to speak. That's a super general way of saying it. But see, I've already met our guests this week, Maggie and her mom, Denise. Even though this interview is over the phone, we were all at the Treating Tourette Together Summit recently in Minneapolis, and they gave their impressions of Cbit, what works, what doesn't, what the insurance questions are, how we improve accessibility, because Cbit at present isn't something you can just go to a small-town doctor and ask for. I mean, maybe in a couple cases it is, but mostly no, it's still getting out there, and we'll talk more about that on this episode. I'll also include a link in the show notes at tourettespodcast.com. to further info on Cbit for everybody interested, and a lot of people are interested, so coming right up with Maggie and Denise. Some responses to the question in episode 0 from Destry. You'll recall last week, he had a question that got into synesthesia, and how for a period of time, he was strongly associating numbers with colors, like 7 is green, 8 is red, or whatever, consistently, that association. But he only had that for a period of time, and then it went away. The association strength, I guess, just kind of went away, which got him wondering if there was a tic-like aspect to it, that temporary nature to it, because for people who don't know, different tics come and go. I've got at least one tic I've had since childhood, but I've probably had hundreds or thousands, I don't even know, lots of tics that have come and gone for no apparent reason. Like, what's up with that? Is Destry's limited time synesthesia somehow a tic or some version of it? I can't definitively answer that, but the question sure did build community. I got a lot of responses from people, like this one from Art. He said, quote, I have connected numbers to colors since I was little. 4 is my favorite number because it's my favorite shade of blue. I never thought it was related to Tourette's, but then again, it's all happening inside the same brain. End quote. That's from Art. Yeah, in talking about this, we're not saying this is a factor of Tourette syndrome. We're just answering Destry's question about whether his synesthesia was tic-like. Got a response here from Zora. She says, quote, Just responding to the episode 0 listener question about numbers. Growing up, my experience was similar to yours. The numbers had personalities, backstories, even power levels. 5 was this powerful retired number, an older brother to 6, who was powerful in their own way but was falling in with a bad crowd under the influence of 7. I'm not sure this was a tic so much as my ADHD giving me anything to focus on besides my math homework, but it sounded similar to both your experiences. End quote. And that's from Zora. Thanks to everybody else who wrote in and responded to Destry. The answers get kind of similar, but it's an interesting conversation, and if any of the science and research people are listening, I'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts about this stuff? I mean, is there anything about the Tourettic brain creating this kind of processing, or is this just something that happens to lots and lots of people anyway? TS is not the only fascinating expression of the brain and doesn't answer everything that I experience in my life, of course, but it is pretty influential and mysterious all the same, even to us lay Touretters. Peter Zhao in New York had this to say about Ed's middle finger tic. You'll recall in episode 1 with Ed Cooney, he has coprographia where he can't help but extend his middle finger. That's a tic he has that, as you might imagine, gets mistaken for a sincere gesture and causes confusion to the people around him. Here's Peter.
Hey, first of all, I want to say just checked out Tourette podcast, my man Ben. And I was featured on the season 3. Now it's already season 4. It's very funny, very interesting. This newest episode in season 4, I talked about coprographia. This guy liked to point middle finger. I had the issue. So while listening to the podcast on the train, I can feel my finger rolling through my hand. It's coming. Yeah, it's coming.
Thank you, Peter. If you guys have any unforgettable stories about socially problematic tics, get up with me. It might actually be fun to have an episode loaded with different voices on this, or have kind of a standing, continuing segment. What's the worst nightmare situation, or just possibly the most absurdly funny situation that you've endured by way of these misunderstood tics? Do you have a story? Just speak it out. Record a voice memo on your phone and email it to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. And again, maybe we'll make that a standing thing. If you prefer to write your response as opposed to a voice memo, something I can just read on the show, that's obviously totally okay too. Again, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Okay, let's get to Maggie and her mother, Denise. These are some seriously great people, so fun to talk to. Maggie actually hand drew and gave me her own take on the Tourette's Podcast logo, which I uploaded to the Tourette's Podcast Instagram. Speaking of, Maggie is also a musician. She loves to sing. And if you go to an account on Instagram called Tourette_covers, like Tourette covers with an underscore between them, then you can find videos of her singing over a ukulele. And she's really great. And it's time for this intro narrative to end and for the best part of the episode to begin. Here's the conversation, me talking with Maggie and Denise. Yeah, we could get going anytime you want.
Okay, sounds good. We're ready when you are.
Okay, cool. So I am recording and everything looks good. First, just tell us your names and the part of the world you live in, the general part of the world, and I guess just kind of what you do. How you would introduce yourself to this audience.
Hi, my name's Maggie. I'm from Colorado, and yeah.
And I'm Denise. I'm Maggie's mom. And Maggie is 14 and about to enter high school.
So entering high school, that sort of transition thing, has that caused your tics to kind of flare up? I mean, that seems to be kind of a point where people experience that kind of thing.
They've gotten a little bit worse. It may have been from the Treating Tourette's Together conference.
Yep.
It got a little bit worse after that because I picked up other people's tics. But I am nervous for school, so I think that has increased my tics.
Well, you mentioned the summit. Let's go ahead and go into that. I mean, how was your experience with it? It was just really cool getting to meet everybody, and I really liked, I guess, knowing that some of the researchers also had Tourette themselves. I thought it was pretty cool.
Well, I thought it was a really great experience because it was the first time that Maggie and I have gotten to meet other people that are dealing with Tourette's, other parents in my case, and in Maggie's case, other kids, as well as adults who have managed to overcome many of the challenges and have great successful careers as researchers, working in technology, obviously YouTube. And, it was really great and empowering to be there to see, these great success stories.
It was just really neat to see sort of that much diversity in age there, and then but also that much shared knowledge at the same time.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was really interesting about that, you know, for so many of us, we subsequently discovered that so many of the things that our kids were dealing with were actually part of Tourette syndrome, and we had no idea, because the first things that get diagnosed tend to be the sensory issues or the ADHD or anxiety and other things. And then suddenly when you get the Tourette diagnosis, it puts all the pieces together. But, you know, I think that had it been based on the first signs of the syndrome, we would have been back, you know, quite a few years on the timeline.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. How did it manifest, so to speak, in Maggie? Or in Maggie, do you remember it kind of catching on for the first time, or do you remember being conscious of ticking?
Yeah. So the first time, like, I think I picked up a tic was at summer camp. I believe I was in 5th grade going on to 6th. And I remember seeing a girl who was blinking her eyes really hard.
Yeah.
And I asked her, "Why are you blinking your eyes so hard?" And she got really embarrassed. And then I feel like that just set off something in me. And I started doing it. And I became aware that I was doing it, and I was like, whoa, what's happening? Like, I saw one person doing it. Now it is happening to me. Like, what is going on?
Wow. So that was really when you became conscious of ticking, you kind of absorbed it from somebody else. That's that's the first I've heard that. I mean, I definitely know and experience the phenomenon of being around other Touretters and other tickers, and you know, kind of feeding off each other. But yeah, that's really interesting that you kind of picked it up from. So what did that tell you? That it was just something that was just kind of waiting for the right cue, I guess.
Yeah. And I started having like more tics. When do you think I started having more tics after that?
Well, I think that when they became most prevalent was actually a couple of years later, when you had started middle school and you had a lot of anxiety and was diagnosed with anxiety. And as Maggie became more anxious, she developed more and more tics, including verbal tics and physical tics. And then, you know, it all kind of came together and she got the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome. But before that, you know, there were like minor throat clearing and very transitory tics, but nothing that really got on my radar screen that it could be something bigger.
You know, when did you get the instincts as far as going to the doctor and kind of seeking diagnosis or advice, or what was your cue?
Well, Maggie had been under treatment for ADHD since 2nd grade. And then prior to that, as an infant and toddler, she had had treatment, physical and occupational therapy, dealing with sensory issues.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we were already kind of, you know, getting treatment, but nothing that had to do with Tourette's. But then when she developed the anxiety in 5th grade, when she started middle school, it was in consultation with the doctor who was treating her. And the tics had become more and more prevalent, but weren't really a big deal. But his own daughter has Tourette syndrome, adult daughter. And so he was quick to point out that that's what he thought was really going on. You know, in addition to the anxiety and the mood issues, you know, that Tourette's was a diagnosis for. And so that was the first time that we addressed it.
So was there advice to, you know, medicate, or just kind of to try other kinds of exercises, or, you know, confidence building, or? Well,
it was initially medication, because we were in the midst of the school year, and we live in a rural area where there really aren't a lot of options. But at the end of the school year, I took Maggie out to Yale to the Child Study Center there. And the first thing that they recommended after doing a full battery and confirming the diagnosis was to try Cbit, which is what we did.
All right, so right here, I want to cut in and just really quickly and really generally define what Cbit is for anybody who doesn't know. It's a pretty exciting development. I didn't really know anything about this when I started the podcast, but I quickly learned there was so much interest around Cbit that I just couldn't avoid it. I had to learn about it. So here's how the Tourette Association of America defines it. You can find this on tourette.org. Answering the question, what is Cbit, or Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics? It says here that Cbit is a non-drug treatment. Again, a non-drug treatment consisting of 3 important components. 1, training the patient to be more aware of tics. 2, training patients to do competing behavior when they feel the urge to tic. And 3, making changes to day-to-day activities in ways that could be helpful in reducing tics. Cbit is a highly structured therapy that typically takes place in a therapist's office on a weekly basis. The standard treatment is 8 sessions over 10 weeks, but can be longer or shorter depending on the needs of the patient and his or her family. The first step in Cbit is to teach the patient to become more aware of his or her tics and the urge to tic. Next, the patient is taught to perform a specific behavior that makes the tic more difficult to do as soon as the tic or urge appears. This competing response helps to reduce, and in some cases, even eliminate the tic.
Which was really great. But the problem, as you probably heard a lot at the conference, is the availability. There's only around 400 qualified providers right now in the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of barriers for parents to get treatment for their kids as well as adults because there are very few providers, plus insurance isn't covering it.
Yeah, we heard about some of the costs. I mean, some of that was astronomical.
Yeah.
So how did you guys approach it? I mean, did you have to drive, 100 miles or, what was it? What was available?
Well, if I could just start by saying that the Tourette Association has a whole bunch of providers listed on their website, which was my starting point. And I started dialing all their numbers and calling to find out where Maggie could get in and what the options were and who was taking patients. And ultimately, we did get on the wait list of one provider, and now Maggie can tell you.
Sorry, I really want to say this part.
Yeah, tell me.
We were able to do Cbit, which was the Cbit therapy, but at our own house.
Yeah.
So every Wednesday after school, I'd be home for like 20 minutes. And then my mom would say, "It's time for your appointment." And then she'd hear a lot of groans and saying, "Mom, can you bring me cookies?" But overall, I was able to do it in the safety of my house, which was really nice and fun. And it was a lot easier than traveling lots of miles like a lot of people have to do. So I feel very fortunate.
That's a good point because there was sort of the question posed, is an in-person always better, to receive treatment? And that, some people may have to go in uncomfortable environments. If you're more used to rural and you have to go into a really dense urban environment, that may kind of set you off. And
right. And for us, the nearest provider would have been about a 4-hour drive away, which wouldn't make it a viable option at all for a 45-minute to an hour session to do 8 hours of driving.
Wow.
So, thankfully we were able to do it through the internet, which was awesome.
Well, so what was the experience like, Maggie? Do you remember your first attempts at this and kind of how it went?
Yeah, I remember that the first time I talked with her, we were just talking about what we're going to do, and I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. And I was still confused about the whole entire thing. And then we were working on my first tic, which I believe it was flapping my arms.
Okay.
I forget. But I remember the first time that I had to learn a competing response. It was really weird because I just wanted to let the tic out. And after about 30 minutes of doing the competing response nonstop, and it was just so stressful and I just wanted to let the tics out. But over time, it became quicker to get the competing response done because I've trained my brain.
Yeah.
But the first few times, it was really, really hard and I did not want to do it.
Oh, well, does it set you off or trigger you to talk about it and what the competing response was, or?
I don't remember what my first one was, but I can tell you, since my vocal tics are the most prevalent, I shall say. Do you want me to tell you how I can use a competing response for that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love that.
Well, first, what I have to do is I pretend I'm talking to an alien from a foreign place that understands English but doesn't know what tics are. So I have to explain everything that I'm going through. So I'll put my hand in front of my mouth and I'll feel which way the air is coming out, if it's coming out of my nose or out of my mouth or both. And then if it's coming out of my nose, for instance, I will breathe in through my nose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out of my mouth, 1, 2. And I want to breathe out for a less amount of time because then there's less of a chance for the tic to come out.
Wow. That's it. So that whole process, I mean, you don't get that instantly. I mean, how much practice does it take to get it right?
Like to get what right exactly? Like the competing response?
Yeah, it's to really kind of. I mean, is it as simple as just learning the competing response, or is it more just you have to kind of practice it and make sure it actually fits with the tic?
Well, I feel like it depends on the tic. Sometimes you'll have to get a new one because it just won't work for some people, but other times it will work, and you just need to keep on trying. And just keep on doing it. My first few times learning to create my own competing responses for new tics, I was like, I didn't really know what to do. So I made things that were more obvious than the actual tic.
Yeah.
And that were not practical, like sitting on my hands. My mom thinks that's a good one, but Then over time, Ashley, my provider, she helped me realize how to do it. And I feel like I just picked up the skill from her, and it became a lot easier for me to learn how to do it. And I've just become a natural at it, I guess.
Well, have you kept score of, how many tics you've been able to manage versus kind of how many you had to deal with before?
I do not keep score, but I know that I don't have my arm clapping tic.
Yeah.
My hand clapping tic. What other tics do I don't have anymore? Like ever.
It's funny because it's sort of ancient history now, so I don't even think about what you were going through. But initially part of the process was prioritizing and coming up with a list of them. And then in terms of how they impacted you list them the ones you want to work on first. And so you start going down the list, and the competing responses are different for each type of tics because it needs to be something that's incompatible with the tic, but also less obvious than the tic would have been. So, while my suggestion with Maggie is can't you sit on your hands, that obviously for some people is more obvious to be sitting on your hands. So, it's just finding whatever is going to work for you. But Maggie's provider was really flexible and worked with Maggie when one thing didn't work. She suggested something else. So it was basically a process of trial and error to come up with things that worked, and then kind of delivering the skill set so that Maggie can, try to figure it out on her own, should something new pop up and she wants to work on it.
Hope you're enjoying this conversation. We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America has been around since 1972, and today is the premier nonprofit in the U.S. working for all people affected by Tourette and tic disorders. One of the ways that happens is through communications and awareness tools, which is one of the reasons why the Tourette Association is the primary sponsor of this podcast. They help me out a lot, and you can find tons of information on their website, tourette.org, tourette.org. And I want to thank them for their support of Tourette's podcast. As far as tele-Cbit, I guess I'm curious about, you go to an actual doctor or nurse practitioner in person, Cbit, there's the insurance question. What about tele-Cbit? How is, the accessibility in terms of, costs and access and all that? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's my understanding, my own provider didn't take insurance, so it wasn't an issue. It was all self-pay. But it's my understanding that a lot of insurance companies refuse to pay for any kind of telemedicine in the home, except under very limited circumstances. You would need to go to a center to have it or do it in person. So I think that is somewhat problematic for insurance coverage. It's something, obviously, I think that we'd all like to see changed because for many people, it may be the only option they have to get treatment. Yeah. Although in my mind, the ideal circumstance would be to have providers in schools, like the occupational therapists in school districts, be trained to be able to provide it to the kids who need it within the schools.
That would be who is responsible enough to administer Cbit. I think is kind of the general question. Should it just be for the doctors, or can other people learn it? Maybe even parents. But there are a lot of things thrown out there that were interesting. That we may be getting some science on soon.
Right. And it's just teaching a set of skills to another person. And so, I think that we saw a bunch of occupational therapists there at the summit. And I think they're just as well trained as doctors to be able to do it. And in fact, they probably have more time and energy to focus on that type of training than doctors in a psychiatry practice that need to stay on top of all the medicines to prescribe and, all of the new characteristics and insurance codes and stuff of various diseases. So, I really would hope to see that it can be more widespread because we need more than 400 providers in this country.
I forgot what it was. It was like 4 hours and almost $1,000 per hour being seen. I mean, that was one of the numbers that we heard at the summit, and that blew my mind. I mean, that's even an option. Well, Maggie, how are you feeling overall? I mean, do you feel like you got a pretty good handle on the majority of your tics now?
Yeah, but after the summit, before the summit, they were fine. But after the summit, I've just been ticking nonstop. And but I do think it was worth it going there because even though I have more tics now, it was great meeting people like you and literally every single person there. They were amazing to talk to and they're all just incredible people.
I agree. I mean, you really got the right idea that the science community truly does care. They really do want to align their research with the needs of the Tourette community. And I didn't doubt their sincerity at all.
Yeah.
And Maggie, actually, something you said too, that the Treating Tourette Together Summit kind of made you kind of flare up a little bit, and that can happen being around other Touretters. Do you ever interact with other Touretters in your daily life, or have you gone to the camp, or even online message groups, anything like that?
No, I've never met someone with Tourette's before this.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, did you expect to have a flare up of tics, or was that something new to you?
I mean, I was expecting it because whenever I talk about tics or something stresses me out, or I used to watch YouTube videos about people with tics. That really increased them, and I picked up theirs. So if anyone's watching this who has Tourette's, or tic disorder, do not watch any YouTube videos. That'll just make your tics go crazy.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. Do you follow any of the the Facebook discussion groups, or do you kind of seek out a community, or is TS just something you just kind of have?
I do spread awareness about it. At my school, I did a huge presentation where I talked in front of it, in front of everyone about it. And so I do consider myself an advocate for it, but I also have it, but I don't really interact with a lot of tickers because it doesn't really come up, and I don't meet people like that because in my town, it's so small and there's just these perfect little people, and it's,
Well, and Maggie's entire 8th grade class at her school this year was 12 kids. So she's at a very small school, and there just hasn't been that much exposure. My guess is, there probably are other people, given the statistics, with TS in the community, but we just haven't encountered them.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I mean, we even talked about the underdiagnosis problem too, that, some people are just kind of living silently with it. Or openly and just don't have the access to the diagnosis. But so did it have an isolating kind of feeling? I mean, was TS something that people asked you about, or?
Is it okay if I share a story or two?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. So one time I was at Whole Foods and I was going tics like that. And this one lady turned around and said, "Where's the dog?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I have Tourette's." And people don't really understand. They get really uncomfortable about it. So then they were like, "Oh, I was expecting to see a cute dog, but instead I saw a cute girl." And she went up to me and gave me a hug. And I'm like, "Please respect my space, my boundaries. I understand that you made a mistake, but that doesn't mean you have the right to touch me."
Good point.
And another thing, at the airport one time, we were going through. Do you want to tell this one, Mom?
Well, I can tell it. We were traveling back east to look at some schools for Maggie for next year. And we had 3 flights to make for the day to get out to Maine to visit one of the schools, and we were delayed on the ground for an extended period because of thunder showers. And Maggie started having a tic that did sound like a dog barking. Mm-hmm. And these women across the aisle from us kept on commenting that somebody must have snuck a dog on the plane, and that there was a dog, and they were going on and on about it. And the flight attendant came back to look to see if there was a dog, and Maggie just cowered and tried to hide under me and against the wall of the plane, and was feeling terrible, but it was just making her tics worse. Yeah. And so that kind of passed, and eventually, I told the flight attendant that Maggie had Tourette's, and that was fine. But then the next flight, we were delayed. Because of our delay, we had to run through the airport in Chicago, and we barely make our flight. And we're in the jet bridge with all these other people, and a gate agent confronts me and tells me I can't bring a dog on board, that I'm trying to sneak a dog on board, and embarrasses Maggie in front of all these people that are in this confined space. And I have to say, once again, my daughter has Tourette Syndrome. There's no dog. We're not sneaking a dog. But all of that just made Maggie's tics worse, and she was ticking like crazy on the plane.
So stressful.
But then we finally get to Newark, and we have our third flight of the day, and Maggie's having terrible tics. But as we are boarding the flight, Maggie says to the flight attendant, "I'm really sorry, but I have Tourette Syndrome, and I may make some sounds that sound like a dog or other sounds. And I'm really sorry." And the flight attendant said, "Oh, my niece has Tourette Syndrome." And
that's
she
awesome.
Our nephew. And, it just changed the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And suddenly Maggie's tics got a whole lot better. And in that case, the woman actually gave Maggie a hug too, the flight attendant. And Maggie was happy and embraced her. And then she later came on the flight, sat with us and chatted with us throughout the flight. We had a seat next to us, and brought Maggie gummy bears. And it completely changed the whole dynamic. Because the anxiety over the tics was reduced, Maggie's tics were hardly noticeable at all. And it just resolved them. But the anxiety surrounding them makes it so much worse. So people's comments, I know that they don't understand that it's making it worse, because I think many of them, are out of ignorance. But, it's amazing what a little bit of education will do.
Absolutely.
And people, I think, naturally want to be kind, but just don't understand what's going on until someone says something to them. So I was so proud of Maggie at that moment. I just... she's only 13, but she took ownership of it and presented it, and it completely changed everything. And the trip was a great success at the end.
That is so awesome. I mean, seriously, just taking ownership like that. So, I mean, Maggie, have you kind of repeated that, or how'd you feel afterward, just kind of going forward? Was this kind of a one-off, or do you really feel that kind of level of confidence?
Well, I've learned to just embrace it. So if people are commenting, I'll just go up to them, tell them I have Tourette's, I'm sorry, it's a neurological condition. I'll explain it to them, and if I have a card on me, I'll give it to them.
Yeah, I knew that would be your answer. I mean, that's really, really awesome that you're taking command like that.
I just think that it's really important, because Tourette's, it's not, a lot of people aren't educated on it, and I feel like if people are commenting on it, we need to spread awareness and let more people know what it is, and that we're not trying to make these sounds or these movements, and that it's just something that it doesn't define us, but we have it and we can't control it.
Yeah. I mean, God, it's such a takeaway from that, when you said just a bit of awareness, if everybody handled it the way that flight attendant did and the way you did, I mean, that was the perfect pairing of someone who got it, someone who understood, but by way of you kind of taking command of that situation. And the biggest takeaway for any non-Tourette people listening is just, you're doing the right thing by learning what it is. So learn what TS is, and then just make room for it. And, things are going to be a lot easier for everybody. And with Cbit too, I mean, did that also kind of give you that sort of sense of command that, you can kind of apply to other ways in your life?
Can I say something real quick?
Of course.
I just want to say, for everyone who's listening who doesn't have Tourette's, thank you so much, because you're learning about it and you're educating yourself on it, and you can help educate others. and you're really helping us out and making a difference in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't do that enough. I mean, I've heard from a decent amount, enough to make me happy. People who don't have TS, who have nothing to do with TS, they just happened upon the podcast and they started listening. And that's really, really cool that they were expressing that curiosity. There's the one person I heard from who thought they were tuning in thinking it was going to be a joke, it was going to be funny, it was going to be something to make fun of. And then they started listening, and they listened to the whole episode and said, I had no idea, I feel stupid. And I mean, that was an amazing moment.
Well, it's good that person, that they listened to the whole podcast, even though it wasn't a joke, and that they realized that it's like a big deal and stuff. So I really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wrote back a very sincere thank you, and please pose any questions you have, and someone professes their ignorance or learns better, and I'm cool with it. They've learned, and no grudge.
Yeah.
And back to your question about the confidence building from the Cbit, the one thing I've noticed for Maggie is after she, even in the middle of the course and by the end of doing the course of Cbit, it really did impact her confidence level. So situations that she'd previously felt anxious about in case she might tic in those situations, she now just goes forward in confidence and knows that she has a certain degree of control over the situation. And so that's been a really great side effect of the Cbit therapy, is the increased confidence and the willingness to try new situations, knowing that, she does have the tools to help her manage the situations.
Yep.
So how do you feel about transitioning to a new school?
I'm a little nervous because they, a little thing that happened when I was visiting the school, a lady came into the waiting room and said, "Is there a dog in here?" So I had to explain about Tourette's once again.
The dog follows you. Yeah.
I'm nervous that other people are going to be like that, but I think that it's very open and accepting environment. So I think that once I educate others, that they'll understand and that I'll be able to move forward and just be treated like every other non-ticker in the world.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect to meet a lot of new students, or is it a lot of the people you knew from your past grades?
I'm not going to know any of them.
Oh, really? Okay.
This school is in the East Coast. So.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, entirely different.
Yeah.
Does that add any, the location and all that, does that flare up anything, anxiety or TS or tics or?
Well, I think that since I've been to Connecticut a lot of times with my siblings because they went to school there, I do feel like there's an element of home there. So I do feel safe and accepted there.
Yeah.
For some odd reason. I don't even know why, but
no,
also
that's great.
all my sister's friends are already there for me, and my sister always talks about them, and they always want to hang out with me, and they want to hang out with me this coming year. So I do think that no matter what, I still have some friends, and I feel like everything's going to be just all right.
Yeah, you're owning it. I mean, that's the way.
Yeah.
That is awesome. What do you want to do?
I think the one thing that we've seen is that as soon as other students become educated about TS, it becomes a non-event. In this past couple of years, once Maggie was open about having Tourette's and her tics, the kids just seemed to stop noticing it. It just was a non-event. So I'm hoping that the same will be the case at our new school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of when I guess first through sixth grade, I went to a private school, and it was mostly the same kids year to year. And we didn't, change classes or anything like that. We just sat in the same room together all day. And so when TS might have been kind of like a thing to mock, for maybe a year and a half afterward, it was just the old joke, and that was just me, and the whole thing had worn off, and they were just familiar with it. And I guess I will say that all of them kind of went on to know what TS is and at least have something accurate to say about it.
And the Tourette Association has the most amazing educational materials that they can mail out too, which I've got a handful that I'll be bringing to Maggie's new school when we check her in, so that her teachers can all have the folders to find out the information about TS so that they can understand. And they also, at the Tourette Association, they make themselves available to talk with educators too, if there's any issues at a child's school, so that they can help set the stage for success for the kids. So it's a tremendous resource, and one that I am so grateful for having stumbled upon, because it really has made this path a whole lot easier for us.
Yeah, I'm going to put that stuff up on the website too. I'm going to have a new resource page with kind of categorized by interest or need, and that's absolutely going to be included. Very important. Well, so Maggie, what's ahead for you? What do you want to do? I mean, do you have any sort of idea of what your sort of ultimate interests are, or what do you like to do?
I like to paint and do a bunch of crafty art things. I play the ukulele. I sing. I used to play the flute and a little bit of the guitar for school. I just really like creative things. So.
Yeah, that's my side of the brain too. I'm not, I'm terrible with math, but when it comes to just creative things or kind of being resourceful with something where you have to, it's just any sort of artistic kind of angle to it is something that kind of calls to me.
I mean, I feel like I used to be better at math than language arts, but now I feel like I'm pretty good at both. So, I mean, I have confidence in both those things, but
that's awesome.
I do think I'm more creative than just like plain Jane,
Yeah. That's awesome. And it doesn't have to be either or, but it's you hear that in a lot of Touretters where that there's some sort of, there's a musical connection, there's an art connection. Very infrequently do you hear someone who has kind of like a pure science mind, even though we met some in Minneapolis. But I mean, it's just, there's that connection is really prevalent, and it's interesting to hear it continue. So what haven't I asked about? What do you think is important to know?
There's one thing that came out of the summit that really fascinated me. And it was in my small group session, Dr. Walkup, who has done a lot of work with TS, he mentioned that tics are basically the canary in the coal mine. That when you start seeing them, you should be aware that there are probably a lot of other things that are going to rise to the surface in terms of the comorbidities, the other issues. And in our case, the tics were kind of the last piece of the puzzle. But apparently for most, the tics are probably one of the first things. And so that, to me, that was really interesting, that it can be a sign that you need to be aware of and look for the other issues that may cause some substantial functional issues in your child's life. So I think that was an important takeaway for me, because it wasn't our story. It probably is many people's stories. And it would be good for parents to know that, when you start seeing the tics, at least be aware that you could also be looking at ADHD, anxiety, depression, OCD, and some of the other things. So to at least be aware that these could pop up and be sensitive and seek treatment if they do.
It really, really changed the way I think about this when he said that. I remember him saying that, and I wrote it down. Because when he said that, I think the way I always grew up with my tics is that I was so ashamed of them, just so embarrassed, that that's what got all the attention, was suppressing the tics or finding ways to mask them or hide them. When, and I'm sort of stressing everything that the tics are actually a sign of or a symptom of. So my anxiety, my sleep issues, ADHD, everything all seems to be flared up by me putting stress on my tics, which are maybe merely just the sign of other things that need to be treated. And that, could result in fewer tics ultimately. I mean, it was, I don't know why I never thought of it that way before, because I know I've lived that iceberg, I've lived with every piece of it at some point in my life. And I've always wanted people to know that, TS is more than just tics.
Right. And me too. I got this, kind of aha moment, and a light bulb went off. One thing that I think would be so helpful is if the Tourette Association did a survey on the iceberg and found out, basically redoing it so that you could see, people pressing a button to point out, the first, second, third thing that got diagnosed with them, and when did, the tics show up. And also in terms of the degree of functional impairment in their lives, which are the things that really continue to cause a problem throughout, their teen years or adult years.
Right.
That, maybe it would help us to focus the stuff that, given limited resources, what should we be paying attention to, particularly as parents when our kids are newly diagnosed? Is it going to be the OCD that's going to cause, problems that we should be addressing with CBT or exposure therapy? Or is it the anxiety or the depression? What are the things that we should be prioritizing in terms of treatment?
I did hear from one Touretteer who's in his 50s, and his tics are not much of a problem anymore. They were really bad when he was a kid. They've kind of mellowed out. He has maybe a couple twitches here and there, but really nothing, except his anxiety has really kept up with him, and other things like depression, and he kind of blames that for taking a greater toll on his just overall health. And so he kind of just feels like he's in decline. And he wasn't treating that stuff. He was taking medication that was supposed to be targeting tics and not having good experiences with that either. But, you have only so many resources really. And trying to attack all these things at once can be really kind of overwhelming. He went to his tics instead of his depression and anxiety. And things may have been different had he gone to the depression and anxiety first in terms of treatment. I'm not a doctor, and I can't recommend that to anybody. Your doctor's going to have to make that call on that. But, it really does make you think about this in a different way.
Right. And some of the behavioral treatments, the CBT and the DBT, if you address them when someone's young, you can reprogram the brain somewhat. And it could have a difference in terms of the long-term outcome. So I think it would be interesting to survey the adults that are still living with TS and the related issues to find out what's really bothering them and of concern and functionally impairs their lives at this point. And, it could help give us a better roadmap. And I think it's never too late for behavioral therapies and, dealing with these issues, but it might be helpful for others to see, if only we could address it earlier or reprioritize it during childhood, we might change the long-term outcomes for our kids.
This has been really fun, and I'm glad we covered the airport story.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. We greatly appreciate what you're doing in terms of educating people about Tourette's. And, it's been empowering to hear other people's stories through you.
Oh, no. I benefit as much as anybody, and I'm not trying to sound pretentious or anything. It's just talking to people like you, and plus the focus on age diversity too. I learn something new every single time I talk to anybody on this podcast. Just any life experience, people answer the same questions in different ways. And it rounds me in ways that I wasn't 2 years ago. It's very, very humanizing, which sounds weird for a human to say, but you know what I mean. It's just that the relatability of it has been nothing like I've experienced anywhere else. So
I just want to say, Ben, in such a short amount of time, I've never respected someone as much as I respect you.
Oh,
and you're
God.
honestly my hero.
Oh my God. That's like, you made my year. Nothing's going to top that in the next few months. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. That is so cool.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, so now I have to ask, I hope this whole thing went as well as you had hoped. I loved it. I had a blast.
Yeah, it was really, really fun talking to you.
Cool.
Yeah,
cool.
It was great. I was a little nervous at the outset, but it was great. I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thanks for listening. Huge thanks to Maggie and Denise. I hope to see you all again soon. What came to mind when you were listening? Like responses, thoughts, questions, comments? Take all that to the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, where our admin, Sophia, out in the UK, is handling everything. To join the discussion group, you request permission because it's a closed group, and you have to answer 3 easy questions. You're presented with 3 questions. Just make sure you answer them so we can separate you, the sincere human being, from the bots and the trolls. The discussion group is a place where you can speak freely with other Touretters and find support, get questions answered, Tell us about the projects you're working on and so forth. At Tourette's Pod on Twitter, Tourette's Podcast on Instagram, Tourette'sPodcast.com. That's where all the past episodes are, which of course you also have access to if you're a free subscriber to the show on your podcast player or through iTunes, however you get it. We do have a way that you can support the show. That's patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast. Thank you to everybody who's signed up there to support the show. It truly, honestly helps. And the primary sponsor of this podcast is the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org with all kinds of information for anybody with questions about TS or wondering about ways to help with awareness. You might think of it this way. What you think you know about Tourette Syndrome may very well be inaccurate or hugely incomplete. That was even the case for myself in starting this podcast. Me, as somebody with Tourette Syndrome, I'm learning and learning and learning. And if you're the kind of person who likes knowing things, having that edge of knowledge, then Tourette.org is a great place to be. And if I can say so without sounding awkward, this podcast is a great place to be too. And I can say that's true for me because it's helped me incalculably. That word doesn't seem right, but anyway, keep the feedback coming. Thanks for listening today. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Tourette's Podcast. Thanks. This is Ben.